And Black Mormons in America, by way of example, were not allowed inside the temples of the religion they followed and could not become priests until 1978. Enslaved Black people were prohibited from learning to read the Bible, or any book for that matter, just as untouchables were prohibited from learning Sanskrit and sacred texts. In churches in the South, Black worshipers sat in the galleries or in the back rows, and when such arrangements were inconvenient to the dominant caste, quote, "the Negroes must catch the gospel as it escapes through the windows and doors," unquote, from outside, said a Christian at the time. To this day, Sunday morning has been called the most segregated hour in America. And I'm going to start off by this conversation by asking Reverend Walden a question about the segregation of houses of worship. Would, Reverend Walden, your very, very powerful and unbelievably personal and sustaining religious and spiritual journey been the same had it been in an integrated church, had it been in a church that was white and Black?
I think that that's a very interesting question. And I want to say that I honestly believe that who I am spiritually at the core of me has definitely been served by being part of the congregation I'm a part of, which is predominantly Black, right? And part of that reason is because coming through so many of the things that I've come through on my journey, it took that to speak into some of the places that I needed restoration and healing. Do I feel like if I was in a church that was more integrated or predominantly white, that I would have been able to have that experience and that healing to the degree that I got it? No. And I'm not saying that there is not a place for us to be together, but I think, and I know that we talked a little bit before, I think that there is something spiritual and there is something incredible that happens when you are in community with folks who can understand you, who have had a similar walk to you, and can help pour into that and help you on that journey. And so I've been blessed to be in more diverse congregations. I've been blessed to be in predominantly white congregations and Black congregations, right? And I think that they all have poured into me. But I will say where I receive the most is when I'm in community with those who are the most like me. And I personally think that that is a positive thing. So I would say, I think that if I was only to have been in a more integrated setting as I was on this journey, I don't know if I'd be as far along as I am right now.
And this is a powerful conundrum at the heart of our question of how do we do this better? No one, for example, asks synagogues to quote unquote integrate. A synagogue is a Jewish space. Where we fail as synagogues is in being a multiracial space, because Jews of color, Jews of all hues, Black Jews do not feel overwhelmingly comfortable in our synagogue settings. And so here we are addressing a question of integration within the group. I know some churches are also facing the same question. How do we address racism in our churches? How do we be integrated as a worship community? How do we be welcoming? How do we let people know? We face this on issues of sexism, on issues of homophobia, and nonetheless, it seems like we're behind so much on the issue of race, on the issue of how do we truly become a beloved community between houses of worship if we're not doing it within. And there, I think we have a very challenging question, because one of the things, Reverend Walden, that you just said, a space that feels like I am comfortable among my people is important. Do I, as a Jewish person, get to say a space that feels comfortable among my people is a white Jewish space? And I say no. I say, no, there is nothing in Judaism that says Jews look this way or that way, or that I have a right to that sense of comfort. And so we are facing this very interesting conundrum of anybody who would offer the idea of founding a whites-only synagogue. That would be awful. And nonetheless, we are in the position where we say, okay, we need Jews with minority backgrounds to feel comfortable, and maybe even support groups for Jews with minority backgrounds. And here I think is something that we could all, I'm interested in your position, in your comments on this, Reverend Walden. When we say it's okay for minorities to gather together in support of one another, but it's not okay for the majority to exclude minorities, to create a quote unquote whites only space, many people say that that's racist. I have a response, but I'm much more interested in yours, Reverend Walden.
And I would say that that is a mindset that is rooted in white supremacy, right? Like, minorities have encountered some things, we've been through some things, we've faced some barriers that almost put us in a place where we need those spaces. We need that type of deep-rooted healing. We've already been excluded from so many other spaces, right? And I am of the mindset that it is certainly not racist. It's doing the work that we need to do in our communities, and that should be okay and comfortable for people. But also, when you talk about minorities as a whole, we're not just talking about Black people, right? We're talking about Latinx people. We're talking about gender neutral people. We're talking about so many people, which technically makes up the majority, right? But we're not treated like we make up the majority. So creating spaces, again, for people to be in community with each other it's a minority community is not exclusive. It's not one specific group. It's many groups who have been excluded from what is seen as the majority. And so, no, it's not racist for us to need spaces for minorities, but it is racist when the white supremacist group or when the elites say, this is just a space for us and all the rest of you have to stay out. Because we're not excluding people. It's open to all when you talk about minorities, including white folks, because there are white people who identify in ways that make them part of a minority group. So we're not excluding white people. We're saying this is a space for all people who have differences to come into. So that's my personal take on it.
And I would say, go one step further even. What you just said is really clear. If I gather a Jewish group together, it is not exclusive. If you are not Jewish and you want to, if you are from another background and you want to join our Jewish group, welcome. Come, we are open. We are not interested in converting people. We are interested in the conversation. If I want to show up to Lincoln Memorial Methodist Church or First Shiloh Baptist Church, no one is going to turn me away at the door. Those are majority minority group settings, and I am welcome to come in. If someone forms an Italian American or a Polish American or a German American cultural group, and I want to learn about Polish culture, they're not going to turn me away. And I think what we see here is this is an argument made by people who are ducking the racist policies in their argument. To say that whites need a white cultural group, what is the basis of white culture? The basis of white culture is white supremacy. It is the exclusion primarily of American Blacks. It is the exclusion primarily of anyone, as Isabel Wilkerson would say, who is not of the dominant caste. So, and there is no positive definition there. They're not saying we're Irish Americans, we're English Americans, we're German Americans, we're Hungarian Americans, and we're white, and we want to celebrate that culture. They're saying we want to celebrate our dominance and separation. And they're making the club exclusive. And I think that's an important nuance that people are struggling with in the public sphere, because it helps us clarify. Another question, though, neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods are segregated. We want our houses of worship to be close to the places we live. If we are supporting and celebrating cultural unity, cultural solidarity in our houses of worship, and our houses of worship are in our segregated neighborhoods, how do we use our houses of worship to overcome this particular segregation of not just house of worship, but segregation of places in which we live?
You know, people often hear me say, like, the church has to come out of their building. What I find funny is you can go into certain communities and the houses of worship is not reflective of the community that it sits in. I think that that's very interesting. But I would also say, in regard to what you brought up into how we do that, is whereas faith leadership, are we fighting for equitable housing in certain communities? We want to diversify our churches, but we don't want to diversify our neighborhoods. Are we fighting to make sure that low-income families can be in some of what's seen as the more thriving communities? We're not. And so if that's what we're aiming for, then we can't keep being faith leaders that feel like we don't have a place in the justice work. We only have to focus on what comes into our congregation or our churches. We have to get involved in the work that creates equity for people, so that we're starting to see that diversity, not just in our congregations, but in our communities and in other spaces. So it's really, if this is what you want, and then you say that this is what you want, how are you showing up in that in other spaces outside of just in your church?
Well, and this gets to a really fundamental question. It was going to be an end of the talk question, but I think it might be a center of the talk question. By the way, last week I had my mother on the call. This week I have my sister on the call, who says there feels like a difference between being a non-exclusive community and being an inclusive one. And I think that's right. I think so. This question is, how do we as religious leaders help people transform our good values into good actions? This question about non-segregated housing, integrated housing, better neighborhoods. What should we be doing? We're so good at religious communities at turning our teachings about good values and good actions into a group rallied around that good action and good value in the house of worship. And just like what you said, Denise, Reverend Walden, we need to get out of the house of worship, out of the church, out of the synagogue, out of the mosque, and say, enough. Our values demand that our city look different. So we need to be better at helping individuals make effective individual actions, both on our own and collectively. Mm-hmm. And I am constantly sort of asking this question: what do we do? How do we get out of the house of worship? How do we face our discomfort? How do we not fight that a low or middle income housing enterprise in our comfortable, mostly, let's talk about it, white suburban neighborhood? How do we fight against gentrification and pricing people out of their historic neighborhood? We need to do that. We need to organize around that. We need to get people out of the pews.
Yes, we do. We need to get them out of the pews and in the community. And we've seen some good examples of this, right? So there are a few churches throughout the city that adopt schools that are in their communities, right? Or if they're a suburban community, they've adopted a school inside the city where they go in and they work with those students and they work with their families, right? And so I'm an organizer. There's also ways of doing listening campaigns around that as a faith congregation. So if you've adopted a school in the city, how are you doing a listening campaign to listen to what those children and what those families are voicing their needs are, as well as what their strengths are and what they bring to the table? And then how are you highlighting that? And then how are you taking that information back to your pulpit on a Sunday and sharing that with your congregation so that they can understand the importance of that work and getting involved in that work, right? Where are you partnering with a sister church or a sister synagogue or a brother synagogue that does not look like yours? Just to do that same thing, just to kind of learn and get understanding of how you show up in these issues and how you are best an ally in these issues. So there are definitely ways of doing it where I'm not saying that you need to just open up your door and start to recruit Black people and Latinx people into your congregation. I'm not saying that you need to do that. I'm saying if that is a comfortable house of worship for them, then they will show up. But the way you start to be a comfortable house of worship for them is by partnering and showing that you're a true ally to our community and that you care about what we care about. And there are some healthy ways of doing that. And I think that we see some of that, but we need to see a lot more of that to get to the beloved community that we often talk about, yet don't do the work of being a part of.
And listening is so key. Listening, we come up with ideas. I've got an idea. Let me go and institute a reform and we'll suddenly make the change. No. I often hear, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. And that we can't organize for people, we can only organize with people. And that's so much more difficult than saying, I have a solution, here, go and do it. Mm-hmm. And what we are asking each other is, can we confront our discomfort? Can we get up and walk to a community that we haven't been to before? Can we get up and drive through a neighborhood that is not our neighborhood? Can we get up and meet and find common ground? Can I come to a church on the wrong side, quote unquote, the wrong side of Main Street and listen? Not suggest, not be an activist, but listen and connect and invest in the time. Now it's easy. Join a Zoom call of a congregation that you have never been to before. What are we doing in our homes except sitting in front of screens? And will we sacrifice an hour of Netflix for an hour of community? That seems like a good sacrifice. I think Isaiah would be behind that sacrifice. That would not be a sacrifice. So on that note, directly on that note, somebody sent me a question ahead of time, which is, how can we as a church in Amherst, an all-white congregation, deal with white supremacy within our walls? This is an interesting question to ask a Jew and an African-American minister. But I would put Reverend Walden on the spot, but only after I offer some suggestions, because I want to hear what you have to say about them. Mostly because I think white supremacy is a problem for whites. We need to stop going to African Americans and saying, how do we solve racism? And if we're going to talk about white supremacy, the first thing, so I recommended a book before, which is called Me and White Supremacy. And it's a 28-day meditation with journal exercises and a whole host of things. And for an all-white community, I highly urge you to pick up this book and begin the project of reflecting on it. Now, there's no way any of us are going to get together for a meeting a day to reflect on a 28-day project. However, a 4-week project. However, it's 4 weeks, so that's 4 Sundays. And wouldn't it be interesting, because it's organized around weeks, for a community to read this collectively? To read this, in fact, I've just decided that is what I'm going to do for our study sessions leading up to the High Holy Days. I am going to read and reflect on me and white supremacy from the pulpit on Friday nights, for starting at the end of August, leading to the middle of September when Rosh Hashanah begins. And because we need to do this, we need to take this on. And I'm so thrilled and honored that this church, the UU Church in Amherst, asked this question. Because if we don't begin to evaluate our preconditions, our presumptions, the air that we breathe is racist. The air that we breathe is formed by white supremacy. And it's different on account of it. It's why the air in the suburbs smells different than the air in the city. That is white supremacy. And many of us have not even begun to recognize the degree to which we live in a world supported by, sustained by white supremacy at the expense of other people. As a white organization, be it a synagogue or a church or a society of friends, if we're not doing this reflection, we are not attending to the central teachings of our traditions. Reverend Walden, now that I've had my say.
One, I am overjoyed that you're going to be doing teachings around that book during the holy season. And I also, again, want to urge people, right? So for me, it starts with leadership, right? So I have to go from where I know. I'm a mother. My kids learn a lot about life, how to show up in life, how to be in community, how to respond to things based off what I model for them. What's happening behind the pulpit? What are you sharing? What are you discussing? How are you teaching your sermons? How are you teaching what's behind what you're teaching when you're teaching your sermons, and why it matters? Are you giving people a good message on Sunday that is good to them in that moment, or are you giving them food that they can work on digesting all week long, all month long? Right? Things that challenge them to grow in who they are and in their perspective of how they show up in the world and how they're in community with others. We have to be addressing and calling these things out from a place of leadership. And then we have to be challenging folks to be doing that inner work to address those things. How are you giving them support and resources throughout the week? And just kind of what are you studying? So, and then again, I brought up things like partnering with churches that don't look like yours. Maybe we don't necessarily worship like you worship, but how do you partner, and not partner and coming in and saying, oh, they live in impoverished communities, let's go in and do this in their community. No, but partner in a way that you're really listening and hearing and learning from, and then figuring out from there how you become an ally and walk alongside them, not for them, right? Because I have a lot of strengths on my own. Rabbi is incredible. He adds to my life in many ways, but I don't need him to do anything for me. But there are ways he can partner with me. And in our relationship, I can communicate those things to him so that now he knows how I need him to show up for me. And my job is to make sure I'm communicating that to him. I think as a faith community, we need to be doing better about that. I am a Christian. Rabbi is Jewish, right? But there are ways that we can partner and support each other, even past the differences, and we're able to be, because we're in relationship, we can do that. So how are you engaging in relationship? And I believe in learning to be in relationship and in community with people who don't look like you, who don't believe like you, who don't worship like you, will then lead to being able to address those things like white supremacy in the church, and also seeing where some of our teachings are still rooted in that, and we're not calling that stuff out. We're not shifting those traditions that we have, that we don't even know why we have them, but they've been around for hundreds of years, so we practice them, but those traditions are rooted in a supremacist mindset, and they need to be addressed and dealt with. But we won't learn those things until we truly learn how to be in community and in relationship with those who are not like us.
Amen. And relationship is such the key. And think about the ways we used to say, some of us, myself included, that we weren't racist. I have Black friends, or I have a Black friend. That's not anything. I need to be in constant growing relationships with people who don't look like me. If I care deeply to build a society that is built around pluralism, around justice, around equality, around equity. And I need to do it all the time. I need to push my kids to do it. We cannot be passive on this. We cannot ever say we are done. This thing that we're calling allying or allyship is a constant push. It is never done because our society is still ailing. And if we are okay with the cancer at our society and we're not doing anything about it, we are supporting the cancer. So we're going to take a risk here. We have somebody who signed on named Nicole Henderson-Johns. She is a pastor in a, what she has said is a white Protestant pastor who serves a church in the heartland of white supremacy, and would like to share maybe some of the things that she has worked on. So Pastor Henderson-Johns, if you would unmute, we will hear what you have to say.
Hi, I heard your voice of saying that, you know, you are a white Jewish man speaking into this context of this question. And I know that I live in Cincinnati, originally from Buffalo. That's how we connected, through my cousin's bat mitzvah last weekend. And one of the things that we have done here in order to address how do you address the white supremacy within a congregation is that we just started up a series of events where we're out in public and doing prayer instead of focusing. We were in the national news locally because of the BLM and counter protesting in Bethel, Ohio, and in order to combat that, that is right around the corner from us. In order to combat that, we spent time out in public on the streets of our cities, in an open forum. Anybody was welcome to join, to sorry, I've got kids yelling at me, to pray, and to pray for unity, to pray for love and compassion and care, to pray for one another, to pray that we can stand up and speak our voices. And also we took a time in our community, we took a time to actually march in silence so that our voices as white people were not silencing or speaking louder than the voices of our brothers and sisters in Christ who are non-white or in any other minority category. So that was something that we did, and there were people in my congregation who are my congregants who were adamantly against it, sent me hate mail, so to speak, about how, well, we can't stand up for that, we can't do that, but we did it anyways. And I think it's the doing it anyways, speaking your voice and saying, no, it's not okay. It is not okay to be in a white supremacy area. It's not okay. It's just period. It's not okay. And being able to give voice to that. And again, as we've heard already, to make community connections with other groups and someone who is not like us, and communities and churches and just organizations that are not like us, but simply to say, my voice is not going to be silenced. My voice is not going to be, I'm not going to stand there and listen to people say things that I know are wrong, and just take courage. We're given courage from the beginning of Genesis all the way through Scripture. Take courage. Do what God is telling you to do, even if it's against the grain. So that was just, I wanted just to share that. I hope it's helpful to some folks in that kind of a context, and just stay encouraged that even if people don't like it, even if people fight back, God is on the side of unity, and we need to be speaking that unity and justice and passion into one another. And thank you very much for taking a chance and taking a gamble on this crazy pastor from out here in Cincinnati.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I also would just say real quick, Rabbi, too, like, so for faith leadership who it's like, okay, I want to do this, but I don't know how, I'm feeling a little something about it. Like, even within your own community, where are you widening your circle and talking to pastors like the pastor that just shared that has found some ways of doing that and doing it well, and doing it anyway, right? There are groups in the city of Buffalo like Surge, which is an all-white group, but that's all they do is show up in this work alongside minority people and marginalized people. That's all they do. Where do you create space for them to come in and share what they do and why and how they do it, right? And so there are opportunities and ways of learning and gaining understanding and getting some very interesting ideas of how to start to do this work in your congregation from other folks who are already open to and have been doing it for a while.
So Judy Fales says, prayer is good, but I am much more interested in action as a white woman. And this is at the heart of some of our struggles, is what do we do next? How do we get out there? How do we make a difference? And we've been talking a lot about coming together and listening, going out of our comfort zones. We are organizing on the second night of Sukkot, which is a Jewish holiday of welcome, which is going to be Saturday night, October 3rd, the first night when I can clear my head from the High Holy Days, a multi-faith gathering for figuring out how to do that. And we're going to listen to each other. We're going to come together because the sukkah is a place of welcome, a place where we're supposed to invite in guests. And so I'm going to pop up a sukkah on some public place. We haven't decided where yet, here in Buffalo. And we're going to invite everybody in on a Saturday evening, and we're going to sing a little quick Jewish ritual. And we are going to welcome people together, and we are going to begin this work as a community of communities. And the more ideas that you come up with, that all of us come up with, that Reverend Walden, who is an organizer, remember, Reverend Walden and I began our relationship in large part because she called me out of the blue and said, after the murder of George Floyd, and said, come to this rally. A rally that was deliberately in this area of us supporting African-American clergy. So the white clergy were behind the African-American clergy, literally and metaphysically, physically and metaphysically. We stood behind, we understood that we were in a supportive role, and we understood that it was our job to lift up all of us. And we need to understand that sometimes we need to be the progenitor of the idea, and sometimes we need to go to one another and say, okay, I'm here. Tell me what you're doing. Tell me who you are. Let's build this relationship, because the relationship building is going to lead to the action. Pastor Henderson Johns, by the way, replies, prayer was our starting point to open lines of dialogue and building new communities. Standing up in prayer was also a way that those who are afraid of speaking out to be part of a community of believers who know that we need change. And so here is speaking of interesting separations, as a footnote, before I let Reverend Walden reflect again on all that we were saying, Jews are sometimes united by prayer and sometimes not. The contemporary Jewish relationship with prayer is tense at best, because there's a lot of different ways of doing it. So we see a cultural, maybe slight disconnect here, which is that for Christians, coming together to pray is a coming together and sharing. And for Jews, sometimes coming together to pray is a coming together and excluding. And figuring out how to transform that in the minds of Jews is my problem as a rabbi, not our problem as a multi-faith community. But that's another story. Reverend Walden, on this subject of coming together, on the subject of figuring out how to relationship build, do you have any other reflections or suggestions?
I mean, you know, I'm a very simple kind of person. For me, it's just, you just have to do it. Like, I feel like sometimes we overthink things, right? And those of us who are grown and seasoned and mature in life, we're going to make mistakes. We learn most and best from our mistakes. So, but being open to allowing someone to speak to that when you do, being open to constructive criticism. But really, there's nothing like just doing it. Get out here, build relationship, meet someone. I'm an organizer, so we do lots and lots and lots of one-on-ones, and we do them to relationship build, just to hear and to get to know people, hear what matters to people, who they love, why they love them, right? Why these things matter. Just do it. Reach out to someone in your network that you can build with in this way that might be able to build you in that way. That's what happened with me and Rabbi John. Like, we just did it. We just did it. It was a little different. It was a little weird. I was really new in ministry then. And I was very intimidated, and I had to really get out of my comfort zone. And when we sat down to talk, I was like, wow, he's really just down to earth. He's a person just like me. And now we have this incredible relationship. Get out of your own way, get out of your head. Do not overcomplicate it. Just open yourself up and do it. Know that you will make some mistakes, right? We make mistakes, but we're receptive enough to one another, and we're deep enough in relationship where we can receive from one another lovingly in that, and know that that's okay. That's okay. And you will just keep building, keep moving forward. And trust me, once you do that, you'll get some momentum and you'll get going.
And I want to raise up the power of let's do it and go do it as a philosophy. We cannot wait any longer. The world is on a precipice. We do not see what's in the abyss, and we are falling towards it so quickly that if we do not figure out how to come together and fly, we are doomed. And so what does that mean? That means on everything, if I am waiting to reach out to somebody, I just need to do it. Whether that person is a relative that I haven't spoken to, or a person in the community that I feel like I need to connect with, because if I don't, my life will be smaller. I need to figure out a way to step out of my comfort zone. We are a culture of comfort. No, it's uncomfortable to wear a mask. No, it's uncomfortable not to go to bars. Look at just those two things and what a massive impact the collective action of all of us, of individuals in the state of New York, has made. Now think, if it comes to an email or a text, there is no such thing as perfect. There is just the warmth of our welcoming hearts opening to one another and saying, okay, I'm here. I'm going to show up for you via Zoom, via phone, via text, in your house of worship, in your neighborhood. And I'm going to be there, and I'm not going there to check it off a list. No doing this to just say, I've done it. Look, I'm not a racist anymore. I went to one church service. Look, I I brought a book to discuss in my synagogue. We're not racist anymore. No. No, as long as I live in a neighborhood that's primarily white, and I still don't feel comfortable sending my kids to the public schools, I am benefiting from a racist system. I am part of a private school as a parent and as a volunteer, and we are opening safely, and we are so overprivileged to be able to do that. And everything I have has been increased by the fact that the bottom caste couldn't have it. My parents benefited and grandparents benefited from the GI Bill. My job has been serving white communities. Yes, we're Jewish. That's great. Yes, we have as long a history of oppression as ever anyone, and yet still I benefit. And if I am benefiting and not figuring out a way to, in fact, undo some of my comfort for the sake of making sure that we don't kill people anymore. Because remember, at the heart of all of our shared traditions is thou shalt not murder. And we are collectively participating in an absolute acceptance, if not a support, of a murderous system. A Black friend asked me if I wanted to offer some of my privilege to a fellow Black rabbi. He said, really, what I need you to do is take the traffic stops for me. Can you sit in my driver's seat when I am pulled over by the police? As a Jew, I need to be against oppression. My religion calls for me to be against murder. And if I am not doing that, every moment of the day I am failing, I am accepting the system. This is not easy. I realize we are asking all of us to do more work in the worst pandemic in 100 years. And yet, if not now, when, said Hillel. Sorry to talk so long, Denise.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I just build relationship. Also, don't have token people. That gets very, very tiring very quickly when someone becomes your token person to a certain cause, right? But really build relationship in an intentional way, and be willing to widen your circle and take ownership for wanting to educate yourself, for wanting to dismantle white supremacy for yourself. Like Rabbi said, don't make it someone else's job. Don't make it my job, right? Like, I don't want to single-handedly have to come into people's church. No, that's not single-handedly my job, but you can build a relationship with me, and I can help you build a relationship with others so that you can do the inner work that will help us do the external work that needs to happen collectively and together. Because I think that gets very, very tiring when we put so much weight on people who are already struggling in the moment just to stay afloat. I get lots of calls, as do so many of my fellow pastors and ministers and reverends of color. Oh, can you be here? Can you do this? Can you speak to this? Can you speak to this? Can you speak to this? No, but I can suggest some readings to you. I can introduce you to some other people. I can do those things because right now I have to do the work of making sure that I stay healed and whole, my children are okay, and my immediate community that I live in every day is supported, and the congregation I serve is okay because they are the people who are closest to this pain. But I'm open to coming into my community. I'm open to you coming into the congregation. I'm open to those things if you're interested in those things. Because I will say that I am noticing folks feeling very weary these days for that reason. So if we're going to do this work, let's be real, let's be intentional, and let's genuinely build relationship. Rabbi John said something very important. Please don't let it be a box you want to check so that you can feel better about yourself to say that you've done it. That's kind of how I feel when I hear somebody say, oh, I have a black friend, or so-and-so I know is married to a black person. So does that check your box? We don't let it be a checked box. Let it be a life change, a culture change, a spiritual shift in you. And truly, like, if we are people of faith, dig deep into your spiritual belief and value system and understand why you need to address this stuff, why it's wrong. Because that's really the place that you start, not just because of what you see in the news or what's happening in the community or what I say or what Rabbi John says, but spiritually, what are you grounded in? What is your foundation that you know that you have to do this work? You heard Rabbi say it, right? He knows as a Jewish person, it is his job to come against oppression. He knows that because of what he's grounded in, what his foundation is. So what does your foundation say? What do your core values say about who you are and how you're showing up in the world? And maybe that's your starting place, is just doing that work to figure that out so that you know that you know that you know. Because the truth is, we don't know what we don't know. And until we figure that out, we're going to continue to have to be in a place where we have to keep addressing this stuff. So what does your foundational, grounding, spiritual values say to you? Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, amen. And so Judy asks, can Voice Buffalo be a vehicle to get us together? She makes phone calls for Voice Buffalo, but wonders if she can meet people through it. Of course. So I'm going to put up some links afterwards and at the end of the call, and I'll put them on Facebook and everywhere for places to go to begin this work in relationship. And I'm sure Reverend Walden and I will pull together houses of worship that would be open to us visiting. And maybe we should begin to do a Sunday morning tour. And as God willing, we can begin to gather again. First, we can do a virtual tour, and then we can do a physical tour. So keep watch for this space, and I will put together us showing up for a church that we don't go to for coming Sundays. And so that'll be, again, here we are. How uncomfortable would it be to click on a new link on a Sunday morning? Not that uncomfortable. And I think what Reverend Walden is pointing out to us is, we said this is racism in religion. It's how we started this conversation. And I'm going to get theological for a moment. What is our God, and who is our God, and what are we held accountable for? We go to houses of worship for all sorts of reasons. For nostalgia, for comfort, for a sense of community, for support, for spiritual sustenance. Our gods, our concept of God, the manifestations of God that we connect to, still demand that we hold ourselves to the highest standard possible. Still demand that to be holy, like God is holy. Well, what does that mean? That means take care of those who are at the lowest rungs of society, and take care to build a society that has fewer lower rungs. That's at the heart of our shared texts, a holiness code. And we get in between ourselves and God if we allow our places of worship to be places of discomfort for people who are different. If we allow our places of worship to not be held to the highest standard of conduct. And so the UU minister asked the right question. what do we do inside our churches, inside our houses of worship first? Because let me tell you, it's going to be a difficult conversation. We think this is a difficult conversation. It's going to be a difficult conversation if we show up not having prepared ourselves for an opening of our hearts to a place that is not our own. We need to prepare ourselves. We need to, in terms of another religion, get right with God. And know that getting right with God is not, again, one and done. There is no checklist for this. Judaism has 613 commandments because it's too many to do in a lifetime. It's too many for any one person to do. We have to keep working on it. So with that, I wanted to open it up and see if anybody had any questions, because we've been talking a lot. And if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. I'm looking at all of our participants, or send me a chat. Otherwise, Reverend Walden and I will keep talking. All right, so next thing. There is a story that I wanted to bring. It's a story that was on a podcast. New Nepalese neighbors move in and no one welcomes them. And the new immigrants feel like they're in a hostile environment, even though their neighbors were just busy. We all know about the hostile actions that we're supposed to avoid. What we don't know are about all the passive good intentions out there. How do we turn our good sentiments into transformative actions? Isn't the goal of religious communities to transform good thoughts into the beloved community? So this was contrasted with a story of a Black professional man who was pulled over by the police and was surprised that a white woman had stopped across from them and filmed the encounter on her phone. And the Black man looked across the street at the white woman filming his traffic stop and saw that she was terrified, and that she was terrified for him on account of his place. So this, Reverend Walden has pointed out that this starts with relationships. We are not a neighbor building community anymore, although we call ourselves community of good neighbors. I am guilty of this. I have never brought a freshly baked pie or new food to somebody who's moved into my neighborhood. I have never. I have received it, but I've never done it. And if we are not doing that, if we are not actively engaging in our neighborhood, again, we are allowing passive good intentions to be taken regardless of the cultural implications of it. This Nepalese community, this Nepalese family thought that nobody liked them because nobody came and talked to them. What are we doing to overcome our passivity?
That's powerful. That's powerful. And I honestly think a lot of times we get caught up so much in our day-to-day life, but it's moments like this that remind us of why we need to go past good intentions and start creating good actions, right? And that might mean shifting something in your schedule. That might mean fitting something else in that you don't necessarily want to have to make time for. Everything cost us something, but I was taught young in ministry that we have to learn to count the cost. What is it worth? What is it worth to you? What is it worth to me to have a relationship with my neighbors? And so I very intentionally walk and speak to everybody I pass in my community every single morning. And I don't always want to do it. I don't always feel like doing it. But I know that we are in a time, especially as Black people, where we're carrying a lot of hurt, and it makes a difference to have someone show up and smile and just say good morning to you. And if they strike a conversation, I make time to have that conversation, and I allow time in my schedule for that. Which is hard, right? Being a single mom and clergy and working a full-time job, and then there's my volunteer stuff, right? It's hard, but it's necessary. And it's not enough for us to be a community of faith with good intentions. We have to be communities of faith that create good action. And so what does that look like? And it's going to look different for everyone. But again, we need to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we need to become comfortable with shifting things that we don't want to shift in order to make time to be intentional in the things that matter, like relationship building.
Wonderful. Thank you, Reverend Walden. Reverend Henderson John said, in addition to prayer, we as pastors organized come to the table conversations where a facilitator led conversation about bias. These conversations allowed for a respectful space for people to realize our cultural racism. Conversations involve diverse communities as well as all white communities. And the more of this we do, the better. We've done racial healing circles between our communities. We'll continue them. We're doing restorative circles and restorative practices between our communities, and we'll continue them. And as Judy fails, will continue to push me, what actions can we take? And the relationship building part is the long road to the effective action. Because then when it comes to calling somebody like a legislator or a city official and saying we need this, it's not we need this because I think it's right, it's we need this because I know who it's affecting. And that's going to be our next conversation. Our next conversation is going to be differentials in health outcomes and mental health in our communities. How race impacts what happens on the east side of Main Street and what happens on the west side of Main Street is a different life expectancy for people. How race means that I have no problem getting a recommendation for a therapist for my mental health, but many Black people going into their primary care physician will not get the recommendation and will not end up seeing a therapist. And if they do, they will have to overcome 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 times the cultural stigma about mental health. Why, for example, understandably, justifiably, Black people in this country do not trust doctors. That our medical establishment has been part of the caste system that has used Black people for medical experiments in this country for hundreds of years. So we have a lot to talk about on that. Reverend Walden, you want to offer any thoughts before we conclude?
The last thing that I would offer, and so at Voice Buffalo, we have a different philosophy for organizing than you find in most social justice organizations. And as in organizing, we do something called agitation. That's how we move people. And ours is rooted in who do you love? And so I would just challenge you all between this and the next time we come together, think about who do you love and what impacts them. Or maybe for some of you, who do you need to love and what impacts them? So I leave you with that. I thank you for your time. I am honored and humbled every time we get to have one of these conversations, and so many of you take time out of your day to participate in these conversations. And again, I just challenge you, who do you love or who do you need to love? And I ask that you be blessed.
I ask that all of us be blessed. Who do we love? Who do we need to love? And I offer these closing quotes from the opening of Isabel Wilkerson's new book. This is James Baldwin. Because even if I should speak, no one would believe me. And they would not believe me precisely because they would know that what I said was true. And Albert Einstein said, if the majority knew of the root of this evil, then the road to its cure would not be long. With those two quotes in our heads, Who do we love? Who do we need to love? And how will we go about it? Thank you all so much for gathering with us today. I look forward to our next time. And thank you, Reverend Walden, for being the consummate faith leader and partner in this work.
Thank you.